In the vast expanse of space, where countless stars blink like diamonds in the night, the galaxy seemed like an endless mystery. It stretched out across the universe, filled with thousands of planets, alien races, and civilizations. From the technologically advanced Zorith to the ancient Iterin, every race had one thing in common: a map. A map that guided them through space, helping them find new worlds and chart new territories. The maps were their lifelines, passed down from generation to generation, their edges well known and their paths carefully traced. But there was something strange about these maps. Every single one of them, from the oldest to the newest, shared a single, chilling detail. The maps all ended at the boundary of human space. No stars, no planets, nothing. Just blackness. An empty, unexplored void. No race dared to venture beyond it, and no one asked why. The Galactic Council, made up of representatives from all the most powerful species in the galaxy, was an assembly of great minds. But even they couldn't shake the mystery of this boundary. There had been countless discussions, debates, and arguments, but no one was willing to speak openly about the truth. The leaders of the Zorth Iterin and even the peaceful Inorian kept their silence. Every map they created, every new star system they discovered, would always end at the same place: human space. Why? What was it about this boundary that made even the most advanced civilizations hesitate to cross? No one knew, but the fear it created was real as the stars themselves. The boundary was a forbidden zone. It was the one place no one dared explore. In the grand meeting hall of the Galactic Council, the lights dimmed, and the holographic map of the galaxy appeared before the council members. Its bright blue lines representing known space were like threads that wove the fabric of the universe. But as the lines reached human space, they stopped. No stars appeared beyond that, just a deep, empty blackness. "This is where the maps stop," said Kana, an ancient and wise leader of the Zorith. His voice echoed in the hall, sending a shiver down the spine of every being present. "Beyond this point, there is nothing." He paused, his many eyes scanning the other leaders. "And no one has dared to venture beyond this boundary, not in centuries." The silence in the room was thick, like a heavy fog. Every leader, from the towering Iterin to the small but fierce Kahura, glanced uneasily at one another. There were no stars, no planets, and no records of any exploration past human space. It was as though the universe simply stopped. "Are we sure?" asked a voice from the back of the room. It belonged to Rin, a young and ambitious diplomat from the Anarian species. "Maybe it's just a mistake. Maybe it's not the end. Maybe there's more out there, waiting to be discovered." Kana's expression grew darker. "It is not a mistake," he replied coldly. "The galaxy has been mapped for millennia. Every race, every species has explored the edges of their territories. But when they reached a boundary of human space, they stopped. Those who ignored the warning were never seen again. There are no records, no communication, nothing." The air in the room grew heavy as the weight of Kana's words sank in. It wasn't just a map, it was a warning. The boundary was not just a line, it was a barrier no one dared to cross. And yet, as the council continued to discuss the mystery, a strange sense of dread began to grow. A few leaders, like Rin, whispered about the possibility of new discoveries, a brave new venture into the unknown. But even as they spoke, they hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence. No one wanted to risk crossing that line. "Why is it so dangerous?" Rin asked, unable to hold back her curiosity. "What happens to those who venture beyond? Why does no one return?" Kana looked at her with an expression that was difficult. To read it was a mix of ancient wisdom and fear. Because what lies beyond the boundary is not meant to be known. The very nature of that place, it destroys those who try to uncover its secret. The galaxy has long agreed to leave it alone. To question it is to invite destruction. The room fell silent once again. The truth of what Kana had said hung in the air like an unspoken agreement. The boundary was not just an unknown, it was a danger that had been feared for generations. And yet, despite the warnings, a small seed of curiosity began to take root in the hearts of some. As the meeting ended, Mara Reyes, a captain in the human fleet, stood at the back of the room. Her thoughts were racing. She had heard the stories, felt the unease in the air, and seen the fear in the eyes of the other leaders. But something inside her told her that the truth, whatever it was, had to be uncovered. She had always been one to seek out the unknown, to push boundaries, and to explore new frontiers. As the leaders of the Galactic Council dispersed, Mara approached Kana. "I understand the danger," she said quietly, her eyes locked on his. But if no one dares to ask why, how will we ever know what lies beyond? Isn't it our duty to explore the unknown, to face the darkness and find out what's on the other side? Kanar gave her a long, hard look. For a moment it felt like the weight of the entire galaxy rested on his shoulders. Finally, he spoke. It is not your duty to uncover what should remain hidden, but your curiosity, Captain Reyes, will be your undoing. The boundary is not just a map, it is a warning. With that, Na turned away, leaving Mara standing in the darkened hall. His words echoed in her mind. The mystery of the map, the boundary that no one dared to cross it, was calling to her. And despite the fear, despite the warnings, she knew one thing for sure: she would be the one to uncover the truth. But the question remained, what price would she pay for it? Captain Mara Reyes stared at the holographic map in front of her, her fingers lightly brushing over the glowing projection. The map, which had been passed down through generations of humans, showed the known galaxy with its countless stars, planets, and trade routes. But every time she reached the edge of human space, the map flickered, as though it were afraid to continue. Just past the last known star system, the map turned black, a vast empty void stretching far beyond what any human could comprehend. Mara had seen this map 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different. There was an odd tension in the air, something that stirred within her an unshakable pull. She had heard the stories of the boundary, the mysterious line that marked the end of all galactic charts. No one knew why it existed, or what lay beyond it. The fear of what could be there was enough to keep even the bravest minds from questioning it. Yet, there she was, standing in front of the map, wondering if the silence that had lingered for centuries might finally be broken. The hum of the Odyssey, her starship, echoed through the silent command deck. The crew was busy preparing for their next routine mission, unaware of the questions that had been stirring in Mara's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the boundary was more than just a map's error. It was as if someone, or something, had created this barrier, intentionally stopping all who would dare explore it. What was it that no one wanted to uncover? As she turned away from the map, her mind racing, her communication officer, Lieutenant Kale, approached her. His brow was furrowed, and his expression was filled with concern. "Captain, we've just picked up an anomaly near the edge of our space," Kale said, his voice low. "A distress signal. It's strange though it's coming from within the void, the area where no stars should be." Mara's heart skipped a beat. The void, the very place that had haunted her thoughts for so long. She glanced back at the map, her mind racing with the possibilities. "A distress signal," Mara repeated, her voice sharp. "Are you sure?" "Yes, Captain," Kale confirmed, his fingers flying over his console. "The signal is coming from coordinates just beyond the last known star system. There's no way it could have originated from any of our ships or known stations." The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of Kale's words settled over her. A distress signal from the heart of the void, where no one had ventured in centuries. No one but her. Mara's thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of curiosity and fear. She knew the stories, the warnings, but something deep within her stirred, urging her to investigate. The same curiosity that had driven her to become a captain in the first place. The same urge that had pushed her to chart new routes and uncover the unknown. "Prepare the ship," Mara said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "Set a course for the signal's coordinates. We're going in." Kale hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting toward the map once more. He seemed to be searching for any hint of reassurance, but he found none. Finally, he nodded, stepping back to relay the orders. Mara moved to the center of the command deck, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the crew go to work. The hum of the Odyssey grew louder as the engines powered up, preparing to leave the familiar stars behind. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The ship slowly turned away from the safety of known space and drifted toward the darkness. As the stars faded from view, the eerie stillness of the void crept in. Mara's heart pounded in her chest. It was as though the ship itself was holding its breath, unwilling to disturb the silent expanse that stretched endlessly before them. "We're approaching the coordinates, Captain." Kale's voice broke through her thoughts, but it did little to calm her nerves. His tone was filled with both awe and fear, like a man on the edge of a great precipice. "Bring us in slowly," Mara ordered, her eyes fixed on the dark void ahead. "We don't know what's out there." The Odyssey glided forward, the soft hum of its engines the only sound that filled the silence. As they crossed into the empty space, something strange began to happen. The ship's sensors flickered, briefly losing contact with the rest of the galaxy. The map on Mara's console began to distort, showing fragmented images of stars that should not have been there. Something's wrong, Kale muttered, his voice laced with tension. The sensors are malfunctioning. It's like we're being pulled into the void itself. Mara's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary malfunction. Something was happening here, something that was not just disrupting their technology, but blocking their ability to understand where they were. She leaned forward, her hand hovering over the controls, ready to take immediate action if things went wrong. Hold steady, Mara said, her voice calm but firm. We need to find out where that signal is coming from. Suddenly, the ship shuddered. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the hull, followed by a flash of light that blinded the crew for a split second. The entire ship lurched to the side, throwing everyone off balance. Report, Mara shouted, gripping the edge of her chair. We've entered some kind of gravitational anomaly, Kale responded, his voice strained. It's like we're being pulled towards something. Mara's mind raced. This wasn't just a random signal. This wasn't just a malfunction. There was something out here, something waiting in the dark. They were no longer just explorers, they were intruders. And whatever they had stumbled upon, it was alive. With a sharp intake of breath, Mara knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. Whatever awaited them at the edge of human space would change everything, and the cost of knowing the truth could be higher than they ever imagined. The crew of the Odyssey had crossed the line, and they were about to uncover a secret that no one had dared to speak of for millennia. The Odyssey continued its journey deeper into the void, its engines humming steadily, though an unsettling tension hung in the air. Outside, the familiar starlight had long disappeared, leaving only endless blackness. The ship seemed like a tiny speck drifting through a silent, indifferent universe. With every passing minute, Mara's heart pounded harder in her chest, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, yet her curiosity pushed her forward. Captain, I'm detecting something. Kale's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the tension. His voice was shaky, and Mara could hear the hint of fear. There's a shape up ahead. It's hard to make out, but I think it's a structure, something massive. It's not on any map, not even in our databases. Mara's eyes locked onto the view screen. At first there was nothing, just the infinite black of space. But as they moved closer, a faint outline began to take shape, like a mirage. It was enormous, vast beyond comprehension, and yet it felt as though it had been waiting for them, as if it knew they were coming. On screen, Mara ordered, her voice calm but with an edge of urgency. She moved closer to the console, her fingers brushing the controls. The ship's view screen flickered, adjusting to the strange light. Then, it revealed the source of the disturbance, a massive structure, something more ancient than any human could have conceived. It was a city now, in the middle of the void. It stretched in all directions, a collection of jagged spires and broken walls, as though it had been built to touch the stars but had fallen long ago. What was once a grand civilization now lay in ruins, frozen in time, waiting for someone to discover its secrets. The structure seemed to hum with a low, eerie energy, its silhouette sharp against the darkness. It was clear that this wasn't just some random debris, it was something constructed, something powerful. But what purpose did it serve, and who had built it? Should we investigate? Kale's voice broke into her thoughts, and Mara could feel the hesitation in his tone. The ship was drifting closer, pulled by the strange energy emanating from the ruin. Mara's mind raced. The entire galaxy had avoided this place for centuries. Yet here they were, on the edge of discovery, staring at something ancient and forgotten. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a ruin. It was a message, a warning, something that could change everything. Yes, Mara said, her voice steady despite the swirling chaos inside her. We need to see what's inside. The crew fell silent as the Odyssey moved closer to the structure, its engines working in quiet harmony with the strange pull of the ruin. The city loomed larger, its broken towers rising like fingers reaching into the void, stretching toward something unseen. As they neared, the ship's sensors began to register odd reading spikes of energy, disruptions in gravity, anomalies that didn't fit with anything they knew about the galaxy. This isn't just any ancient city, Kale said, his voice filled with awe and fear. It's alive in some way, like it's been waiting for something, or someone. Mara felt a chill run down her spine. The ship's hull vibrated slightly, and the feeling of unease settled deeper into her bones. There was no telling what had happened to this place, or what it had been built for. It wasn't just abandoned, it was preserved, as though someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it remained untouched. The Odyssey finally came to a halt just outside the ruins' enormous entrance. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of forgotten history. The city's once grand gates stood wide, open as though inviting them in. There was no turning back now. Whatever they were about to uncover, it was beyond anything they had imagined. "Prepare for landing," Mara ordered. Her voice was sharp, but there was a hint of uncertainty. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave this place. But her curiosity and the strange pull that kept urging her forward kept her grounded. She was committed now. They all were. The crew quickly moved to their stations, securing the ship for landing. The engines thrummed as the Odyssey descended, its landing gear locking into place with a soft clunk. The ship settled on the cold, lifeless ground of the ancient city. Mara stepped into the airlock, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The ship's lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. A faint hum still vibrated in the air, as if the city itself was alive, breathing. "Ready, Captain." Kale's voice came through the comms again. "We're standing by." Mara nodded and motioned for her team to follow her. They made their way toward the entrance of the city, the massive doors opening slowly as if welcoming them into its dark heart. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick, colder than it had been outside, and there was an unsettling stillness, as though the city had been frozen in time for millennia. The walls were lined with strange symbols, patterns that Mara couldn't recognize, carved deep into the stone. It was as though the entire city had been built with a purpose, every detail meticulously crafted, yet all of it now lost to time. The corridors stretched endlessly before them, and the deeper they went, the more the feeling of dread settled. "Stay sharp," Mara said quietly, her voice echoing in the silence. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." They moved cautiously, their footsteps barely making a sound. The deeper they went into the city, the more it felt like something was watching them, waiting. And then, they found at the heart of the city. In the center of the vast chamber was a massive stone pedestal, and atop it, a strange, glowing orb. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, almost like a heartbeat. Around it were more symbols, more carvings, some of them resembling stars, others, something else, something Mara couldn't quite understand. As they approached, the air seemed to hum louder, the energy around them intensifying. The orb began to glow brighter, casting strange, shifting shadows across the chamber. It was like a signal, a call. And then, as if on cue, the ground trembled. The hum of the orb grew louder, shaking the very walls of the city. Something was waking up, something ancient and powerful. Mara's heart raced as she realized the truth. They had not stumbled upon a forgotten ruin. They had found the heart of something much older, something far more dangerous, and it was now alive again. The silence was broken by a sudden, deafening cracker sound, like the breaking of the very universe itself. The ground beneath Mara's feet shook violently, throwing her off balance. Her hand shot out to steady herself against the nearest pillar, her heart pounding as the chamber trembled. The orb, glowing fiercely in the center of the room, pulsed, with an intensity that seemed to shake the very air around them. Light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. And then, with a sudden, terrifying lurch, the orb sent a shockwave through the chamber, knocking her and her crew members to the floor. "Captain," Kale's voice echoed from behind her, filled with panic. "What is happening?" Mara pushed herself up, her muscles screaming from the impact. She scanned the room, her eyes wide. The walls were beginning to crack, and the ground beneath them seemed to split open, as if the city itself were awakening from a long, dormant slumber. The symbols on the walls started to glow faintly, their intricate patterns shifting in ways that were impossible to follow. It was as though the city was alive, breathing, moving. "We need to get out of here," Mara barked, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized it was too late. The entrance they had come through was gone, sealed shut by some unseen force. The doors had vanished, leaving nothing but solid stone behind. "Captain, look," Kale shouted from the far side of the chamber, his voice filled with disbelief. Mara turned just in time to see something horrifying. From the cracks in the walls, from the shifting stone and glowing symbols, something was emerging, something not of this world. Massive figures, dark and imposing, were materializing from the shadows. At first, they seemed like wisps of smoke, but quickly took form, towering over them like ancient giants, their shapes flickering in and out of existence. They had no faces, no defining features, just silhouettes of darkness, their presence emanating an almost oppressive sense of power. The crew drew their weapons, but Mara knew it would be useless. Whatever these things were, they weren't normal creatures. They were something far beyond their understanding, ancient and powerful. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, colder, as if the city itself was rejecting their presence. "What do we do, Captain?" Lieutenant Kale's voice cracked as the darkness closed in. He sounded terrified, his hands trembling as he held his rifle. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced. She had to think, had to find a way out of this. But there was no obvious exit, no way to fight back. The figures moved closer, their forms now almost fully materialized, and the pressure in the room intensified, squeezing the very breath from her lungs. Then, the orb in the center of the room flickered again. This time, the light didn't fade. It surged outward, a wave of energy that blasted through the chamber. The dark figures recoiled, but they didn't vanish. Instead, they seemed to absorb the energy, growing larger, more powerful. They turned toward the orb, their attention fixed on it, as if it were calling to them. Mara's heart skipped a beat. The orb wasn't just some artifact, it was a beacon, a signal to these creatures. They weren't just waking up. They were responding to the orb, and the moment it activated, they had come. But why? What were they here for? The room trembled again, and the walls began to close in. The sound of stone grinding against stone was deafening, and it was clear that the city wasn't just a place, it was a weapon, a trap meant to ensnare any who dared to uncover its secrets. Mara could feel the walls pressing inward, and the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They were trapped. There was no way out. "Captain, there's a tunnel over there," Kale shouted, pointing to a narrow opening at the far side of the chamber. The tunnel was barely visible, hidden in the shadows, but Mara saw it just in time. It was their only chance. "Move, now," Mara shouted. She grabbed Kale by the arm and pulled him toward the tunnel, her crew quickly following. Behind them, the dark figures stirred, their forms shifting and rippling like smoke in the wind. They weren't just standing still, they were advancing, closing in on their position, and each step they took made the very air feel heavier. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for them to move through without bumping into the walls. As they ran, the sounds of the creatures behind them grew louder. Their eerie, inhuman whispers echoed down the corridors, sending chills down Mara's spine. It was as though the very walls of the city were alive, breathing with them, closing in tighter as they moved deeper into the heart of the ruin. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, twisting and turning as if it had no end. But Mara didn't stop. She couldn't. Not with those things chasing them. Not with the city falling apart behind them. Each step forward felt like a race against time, and the deeper they went, the more she felt the weight of the place pressing down on them. This was no mere ruin, it was a trap, a snare set by something far more ancient and far more dangerous than any of them had realized. Finally, they reached a chamber that was different from the others. It was small, cramped, but it seemed to pulse with a strange energy, like the room itself was alive. At the far end was a stone pedestal, and atop it, a glowing crystal much like the orb they had found earlier, but smaller and far more focused in its glow. It hummed with energy, its light casting strange, angular shadows across the room. Mara approached cautiously, her eyes locked on the crystal. There was something familiar about it, something that tugged at the back of her mind. She reached out, but before her fingers could touch the surface, the ground beneath her feet shuddered. Violently, the dark figures had found them. She spun around, instinctively drawing her weapon, but she knew it would do no good. The figures were already there, surrounding them, their forms shifting and swirling like smoke in the wind. The cold air thickened as they approached, and Mara felt a suffocating sense of dread wash over her. Then, the crystal flared brighter, its light blinding. The figures recoiled, their forms flickering as though they were being repelled by the light. But the moment was brief. The crystal dimmed, its light fading back to a soft, eerie glow. And in that instant, Mara understood the crystal was a key. It was meant to keep the darkness at bay. But now, with the orb in the center of the city activated, the darkness was breaking free. "Get to the crystal," Mara shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. She had no idea what it would do, but it was their only chance. The light from the crystal flickered weakly, casting long, twisted shadows across the chamber. Mara could feel the weight of time itself pressing down on her, suffocating, as the dark figures advanced toward her and her crew. Each step they took seemed to drain the air from the room, leaving only an oppressive silence behind them. The eerie whispers echoed in the walls, not in words, but in a deep, unsettling hum that made her skin crawl. "We have to do something," Kale shouted, his voice sharp with panic. He was gripping his rifle tightly, though Mara knew it wouldn't do any good. There was nothing to shoot. The figures were beyond any weapon they had. But before she could respond, a sudden, deep rumble shook the room, sending vibrations through the stone beneath their feet. The entire chamber seemed to shift, the walls groaning like they were being pulled apart. The crystal on the pedestal flared briefly, as though trying to resist the pressure, but its glow dimmed once again. Flickering like a candle in a storm, Mara's heart raced. The creatures weren't just approaching, they were driving the energy of the city back into the core. She could feel it now, an invisible force radiating from the walls, seeping into her skin. It wasn't just power, it was hunger, an overwhelming, gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume everything in its path. These things were drawn to the crystal, to the very essence of the city. They weren't just here by accident, were here for something. But what and why? Suddenly there was a sound, a low, guttural noise that broke through the hum of the city. Mara's eyes shot to the pedestal, where the crystal was now beginning to pulse in rhythm with the dark figures. The air grew thick with tension, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, the chill biting into her bones. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the city's structure reacting, it was something deeper, something hidden beneath their feet. The crystal flashed brightly, then suddenly shattered. The light broke into countless shards, each one hanging in the air like a frozen star. Time seemed to slow, the fragments suspended in the dim light, before they all shot outward, each piece embedding itself into the walls of the chamber. With that, the air crackled with energy, more powerful than before. The dark figures recoiled, their flickering forms writhing in the light, but they didn't fade. They grew larger, their shapes becoming more solid, more tangible. "We've got to get out of here." Kale's voice rang out, but Mara could hardly hear him. Her mind was racing too fast. The crystal had been more than a key, it had been a prison. And now, with its destruction, the city's true purpose was becoming clear. It had not just been an ancient civilization's home, it had been a containment vessel. The orb, the dark figures, the crackling energy, it was all tied to something, far older than anything Mara had ever imagined. Mara turned toward the tunnel they had come through, but the dark figures were already there, filling the entrance. They were blocking any hope of escape. The ground beneath their feet split open, the stone cracking in jagged lines, and from the gaping wound, an even darker energy began to seep out, a swirling black mist that filled the room, choking out what little light remained. The creatures weren't just trying to stop them, they were pulling them into the heart of the city, into the very thing they had been hiding from. Mara's thoughts raced, her chest tightening. The chamber was closing in on them, the walls moving faster now, and she realized with a jolt that the city was collapsing in on itself. And then, with a roar that shook the very air, the creatures lunged forward. They were fast. Mara didn't have time to react. She grabbed Kale, pushing him to the side, just as one of the figures reached out with a hand that seemed to blur into the air itself. The touch of its fingers felt cold, like a void that sucked all warmth from her skin. Instinctively, Mara raised her arm, trying to shield herself. But before the figure could reach her, a blinding light flared from the tunnel entrance. The energy from the crystal, now scattered throughout the chamber, pulsed in unison, each shard glowing fiercely in the darkness. The creatures shrieked high-pitched, unearthly sound that made Mara's head spin. They recoiled, their forms flickering violently, as though the light was burning them from within. For a moment, the room was still. Mara's pulse raced in her ears. She turned toward the tunnel again. It was still blocked. The city was folding in on itself, the walls closing tighter and tighter. They had no time. Without thinking, she bolted toward the pedestal. The crystal's remnants were still glowing faintly, and she could feel its energy coursing through her veins. There was a connection, something she couldn't fully explain, but it was pulling her forward. She reached the pedestal, her hands outstretched toward the glowing shards embedded in the walls. There was something she had to do, something she had to activate. The figures were closing in again, moving faster this time, their shapes becoming more defined. They were nearly upon her when her fingers brushed one of the shards. A surge of power shot through her, and the air around her crackled with energy. The walls trembled violently, as if the city itself was groaning in agony. The light from the shards exploded outward, spreading like wildfire across the chamber. The creatures screamed, their forms writhing in the blinding glow, but they couldn't escape. They were being consumed, pulled back into the walls as if the city was reclaiming them, locking them away once more. But it wasn't over. Mara could feel the power in the room continuing to rise, pushing the very boundaries of the space around her. The air shimmered with raw energy, and she knew, instinctively, that the city was about to collapse entirely. Whatever had held it together for so long was coming apart. It was ending. "Captain, we need to go, now." Kale's voice broke through her thoughts, and she snapped back to reality. The tunnel was still blocked, but now, With the power surging through the room, there was a chance to escape. Mara didn't hesitate. She grabbed Kale's arm and pulled him toward the far wall. They had to find another way out. The city was falling, and they had just moments to make it out before it consumed everything. Behind them, the darkness roared. The air was thick with a deep, vibrating hum, the energy from the collapsing city warping everything around them. The walls trembled violently, and Mara could feel the entire structure of the ruin groaning, as though it were being ripped apart. From the inside, every fiber of her being screamed to escape, but the passageways had all shifted, rearranged themselves in ways that defied any logic. The walls were closing in, pulling the very space around them tighter, and yet the tunnel they had tried to use was still sealed shut. A blackened door with no way through. "Captain, the whole place is coming down," Kale's voice rang out, full of fear and disbelief. The chaos around them was growing, the very ground shaking beneath their feet, and yet Mara couldn't stop moving. The crystal's energy was still pulsing. Through her, the fragments embedded in the walls now humming with a strange resonance, as if they were alive, reacting to their presence. The dark figures had vanished, swallowed by the city's collapse, but the threat still lingered, heavier, now than ever. The walls were closing in faster, and Mara could feel the pressure of the building's decay pushing them forward, forcing them to keep moving or be crushed under the weight of everything that had been unleashed. "We need to get out now," Kale shouted again, his breath ragged. "Before we're buried alive." Mara's thoughts raced, the sound of rumbling stone filling the silence between their words. She didn't have time to think. The weight of the crystal's power, the energy it had released, was so overwhelming now that it threatened to tear the very fabric of the city apart. Whatever had been sealed inside this place was more than just ancient power, it was an entire civilization's undoing. The city had been built to contain it, to trap whatever evil was sealed within. Now, with the last key broken, it was coming undone. They ran, but where? The corridors were now unrecognizable, twisted into labyrinths, and every time they turned a corner, a new threat seemed to emerge. The very ground beneath them split open, cracks spreading like veins through the stone, and beneath them, an abyss yawned wide. The city was tearing itself apart at the seams. "Over here," Kale shouted, pulling Mara toward a narrow passage that had somehow appeared in the chaos. She didn't question him, she just followed. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were now alive with strange pattern symbols that seemed to pulse in time with the tremors. Mara's mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She was so close to understanding what this place was, what had been hidden within its walls, but she had no answers. The orb, the crystal, the dark figures, they were all pieces of something much larger, something that had been buried deep beneath the galaxy's surface, locked away for reasons that were becoming clearer with each passing second. But those reasons weren't enough. They didn't matter now. Survival did. The ruins had been built as a prison, a tomb for a force so powerful that even an entire city had been sacrificed to contain it. That power was waking up. That power was ready to break free. "Captain, look." Kale's voice broke through her thoughts again, and Mara's eyes snapped toward him. He was pointing ahead, at the far end of the corridor where a faint light flickered. "That," she began, but her words were lost in the tremor of the ground beneath them. The light was like nothing they had seen before, sharp electric, and cutting through the shadows like a beacon. Before she could move toward it, a deafening crack split the air. The ceiling above them shuddered, and a huge section of the stone wall fell away. For a moment, everything went silent. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the tremors stopping for just the briefest instant. But that silence was broken almost immediately by the roar of something. Massive something primal shaking the earth beneath their feet. It wasn't just the city falling anymore. It was something inside the city, something alive. The sound that followed was more than just a rumble. It was the roar of ancient power waking from its slumber. "Go," Mara shouted, pushing Kale ahead of her. They couldn't afford to stop. Whatever that thing was, it was coming. The corridor ahead was narrow and jagged, the walls slick with the remnants of dust and broken stone. They had to move fast, and they had to keep moving forward, or they would be buried alive, just like the rest of the city. They reached a light, the glow growing brighter as they neared it. It wasn't a fire or an explosion, it was a doorway. A shimmering portal hanging in midair, barely visible but glowing with energy. The air around it seemed to bend, twisting into something that Mara couldn't comprehend. The edges of the doorway flickered, like it was unstable, but it was their only hope. "What is that?" Kale gasped, his voice filled with awe. "No," Mara said. but her words were lost in the sound of the walls collapsing behind them. There was no time to question it. Without thinking, she grabbed Kale and pulled him through the doorway. Just as the ground beneath them cracked wide open, sending debris flying in every direction, they stumbled forward, tumbling into a new space. It was bright, disorienting, and for a moment Mara could barely make sense of where she was. The ground beneath them was solid, but the air felt different, fresher, colder. For a moment, they lay there, panting, gasping for air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mara's heart was still racing, her body trembling from the shock of it all. She glanced up, her eyes scanning the new surroundings. The room was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were smooth, almost metallic, and the ceiling stretched high above them, vanishing into the darkness. The space felt alive, like they were no longer in the city they had just escaped from, but somewhere else, somewhere new. The atmosphere was heavy, and the strange symbols from the city were etched into the walls, glowing faintly with an energy that Mara couldn't understand. And then it hit her. This wasn't just another room. It was another dimension, another reality, one that existed alongside the broken city they had just fled. For a moment, everything stood still, the chaos and destruction of the collapsing city now a distant memory. They were safe for now, but what was this place? And what had they unleashed by crossing over into it? Before Mara could answer her own question, a low rumbling sound echoed through the room, a soft tremor, almost like a heartbeat. Something was moving in the darkness, something powerful, and they were not alone. The low rumbling that filled the air grew louder, vibrating through Mara's chest like a living thing. She could feel the energy pulsing around them, the same energy that had torn apart the city and driven them into this strange, otherworldly place. The walls of this new space shimmered as though they were not made of stone but something far more alien, their smooth surfaces flickering with strange, iridescent lights. Mara's heart raced. The room was vast, far larger than anything she had expected. It stretched out into an infinity of dark space, its boundaries impossible to see. The air was thin and cold, but it felt alive with something ancient. It was as though they had crossed into another reality, one that existed outside the bounds of time and space. She glanced at Kale, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. Where are we? Mara didn't have an answer. The terror of what they had just escaped still hung in the air like a dark cloud. The figures, the creatures that had once haunted the walls of the city, had disappeared, at least for now. But they had not been destroyed. No, they had only been pushed back. The destruction of the crystal had unleashed something far more dangerous. The real question was, had they escaped? Or had they just entered a far worse prison? The silence in the room was almost suffocating. Only the faint hum of energy, a low thrumming noise, filled the air. It was like the heartbeat of the space. They had entered an unsettling rhythm that sent shivers down Mara's spine. They were far from safe, and she knew it. Whatever lay ahead would test them in ways they could not yet understand. Then, the darkness at the edge of the room shifted. Mara tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm at her waist, though she knew the weapon would be useless. There was nothing normal about this place, nothing logical. She had no idea what was waiting for them in the shadows. The first movement was barely perceptible, just a ripple in the air, like a disturbance in the fabric of reality itself. And then it came into view. Slowly, deliberately, a shape began to materialize from the shadows, like ink spreading across water. It was tall to tall. Its figure stretched beyond the normal bounds of human proportions. Its form was shrouded in a cloud of darkness, a silhouette that shimmered and shifted with every step it took. Mara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a creature like the ones they had faced before. It was different. It felt ancient, it felt old, and it was walking toward them. The shape's movement was fluid, almost like it wasn't walking at all, but gliding. As it drew closer, Mara could see the faint outlines of what looked like armor-glowing symbols etched into its surface, a mixture of organic and mechanical. The more she looked at it, the more it seemed to defy the laws of physics. The form didn't seem to have a fixed shape, as if it was constantly shifting, constantly evolving. The air around them grew colder, and the lights in the room flickered, their soft glow dimming to a faint flicker as the figure drew nearer. The hum of energy intensified, sending waves of disorienting force through the chamber. "Who are you?" Kale asked, his voice cracking. Mara could hear the fear in his tone, but she didn't blame him. There were no answers here, only questions. Each one seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. The figure did not respond. It didn't need to. There was an overwhelming presence in the room, a sense of power so immense that it made Mara's knees weaken. This entity, this being, was beyond comprehension. She felt its eyes on her, though she couldn't see any features on its face. The air around it pulsed with a terrible, unyielding force, and Mara instinctively took a step back. And then, in a voice that seemed to resonate from everywhere and nowhere, the entity spoke. "You should not have come here." The words were not just heard, they were felt. They vibrated in the bones, in the mind. There was a weight to them, a finality, that left no room for doubt. The entity's voice was deep, ancient, and filled with something far older than the city, older than the very stars. Mara's heart raced. She couldn't move. She couldn't even think. The presence of this being filled the space around them, pressing in from all sides. It was like the room itself was alive, and the entity was its heart. "Why are you here?" The voice continued, each word wrapping around Mara like a chain, pulling her deeper into its grasp. "What is it that you seek?" Mara's throat went dry. She had no answer. She had crossed into this place not out of choice, but out of desperation. She had escaped the ruin, but this was no salvation. This was a new kind of hell and unknown, a dimension that had never been meant for mortal beings. Whatever had drawn them here was not something they could hope to understand. We didn't know," Kale said weakly, his voice trembling. "We didn't mean to." The entity did not respond to him. It turned toward Mara, its form shimmering like liquid, its presence overwhelming. And for the first time, Mara felt a deep understanding well up within her, an understanding of her place in the cosmos. She was nothing here. She was a speck in a vast, infinite ocean. "You should not have come," the entity repeated, its voice growing louder. "But now you are here, and you will never leave." Mara's breath hitched. Her mind screamed for escape, but her body refused to move. She couldn't fathom the depth of the power that surrounded her. The ancient knowledge that this being possessed, it wasn't just a warning, it was a decree, a promise that their intrusion would not go unpunished. And then, without another word, the being stretched out its hand, its fingers long and slender, each movement like liquid shadows spilling from its form. It didn't need to touch her. The very air around her seemed to constrict, suffocating her. But just as the pressure began to feel unbearable, there was a shift. Something within her, something deep and primal, pushed back against the force. An instinctual resistance she didn't even fully understand. The entity paused, its hand halting mid-air. For the briefest moment, its form flickered, just for a heartbeat. Mara's eyes locked on its shifting shape. She could feel the pull to know, to learn, to face whatever this being was. But in the back of her mind, one thought screamed louder than the rest. "Do not stay. Run." And in that moment, Mara made her choice.